can shake off their doubts and send out their love as it moves through the crowd, and people can shout that they love a man or they love a woman, and no one will be judged for love, and I can't be judged for who I am.
My name is Joe. I'm a college student at Loyola University Chicago, and I study political science and advertising.
Olá, meu nome é Bruna. Anteriormente eu era Celso, hoje eu sou Bruna. Sou arquiteta, sou funcionária pública do Tribunal de Justiça do meu estado e brasileira. Hoje me identifico como mulher e essa é a minha identidade pro resto da vida.
Hi, I'm Brandon Miller.
I'm Bergie Miller.
And we live in Seattle, Washington. We lived here for 5 years now, and we moved here from Utah. And we have been married for 18 years. 18 great years.
And we have 3 children together. We have a 16-year-old girl, a 15-year-old boy, and a 10-year-old transgender boy.
I was assigned female at birth, and since I was old enough to be self-aware, I really rebelled against that label that was assigned to me. I hated playing with dolls and wearing dresses and that sort of thing. And as someone who didn't really feel like they fit with this body that was assigned to me, puberty was not a fun time. And that has been the majority of what I've been dealing with since 5th grade.
Algo interessante que eu tenho a falar sobre a minha infância, que é uma coisa muito forte, que me marca muito, é que muitas vezes algo que eu tinha que fazer, que era puramente masculino, me incomodava, me trazia um desconforto profundo. Já algo que era para eu fazer, que denominava algo de caráter feminino, me deixava muito mais confortável, me deixava alegre, me deixava à vontade. Eu conseguia ser eu, mesmo sem saber direito o que de fato era uma coisa ou outra. Não conseguia identificar isso direito, até um certo momento.
So, what does an organization do when it's locked into a plan to hold a conference in a state that has just passed an egregious discriminatory law? HB 2, or the bathroom bill, was passed last March, creating a North Carolina state law that prevents transgender people from using government-run bathrooms corresponding to the gender with which they identify. Well, here is our response. At tonight's opening plenary, we will focus on our role as healthcare providers in holding up the LGBT community. We use LGBT throughout tonight, but our intention is to be inclusive, representing all sexual orientations, gender identities, and expressions. Our presentation has 3 segments: LGBT health, Transgender 101, and advocacy. Within each segment, we will have a short best practices didactic, a panel discussion, and a personal narrative from each of our panelists here on the stage, as well as by video. Our panelists tonight, from your left to right, include Michelle Evers, a nurse practitioner at Howard Brown Health Center, a clinical network in Chicago with a mission to overcome healthcare disparities of the LGBT population. Dr. Stephen Migalski, a clinical psychologist on the faculty at Adler University, who also maintains a private practice that focuses on the LGBT population and includes a gender identity clinic. Dr. Stacey Williams, a social psychologist at East Tennessee State University, who researches stigma and LGBT issues. And Beth Evelyn Barber, a licensed social worker who is a counselor at East Tennessee State University, specializing in care for the LGBT population. The videos you just saw will continue throughout the presentation. The videos present a transgender woman from the Amazon area of Brazil. Bruna was deemed a boy at birth, but now identifies as a woman and has chosen to make that medical transition. Joe is a gender-fluid college student from Chicago, meaning that Joe doesn't identify with a typical gender binary and that her gender varies. Brandon and Bergie are Mormons who started their family in Utah and are the parents of a 9-year-old transgender boy, meaning that he was deemed a girl at birth, but now lives life as a boy.
He hated getting his hair fixed. He was the only young child that I knew that loved to wear hats. And I didn't understand it. At first I thought, oh, it's so cute. He loves to wear hats, and all kids sit there and knit him all these hats, and he'll have all these cute hats to wear. And it didn't occur to me that he was hiding his hair.
And I remember taking him to church, you know, curling his hair, putting his hair in a bow in his hair or something, and like he just would get so upset. He would pull his hair, pull at the bows and try and take him out, and he just was not happy.
Yeah, and so it was when he was 3 years old that I was laying by him at night, and he was crying in bed, and I couldn't figure out why he was crying. I'm just like, why are you crying? And that's when he said, why would Heavenly Father make me a girl when I'm a boy? And because of my religious background, I didn't know how to handle that question, and I didn't know what to say, so I just responded, you know what? I just love you. You're my kid, and I love you no matter what. And then I left his room and I came in the bedroom and I told Brandon what was said to me, and I was crying because I didn't understand what he was trying to tell me. And so from that point on, I just tried to build up like, oh, women can do, girls can do anything boys can do, and
tried to be really feminist with them. Like, right. What is it about boys that are so great? And
yeah,
you can be like them.
Exactly.
Anything they do, you can do.
So we would go, because I was a stay-at-home mom at the time, we would go out shopping and doing things, and he was constantly getting mistaken for being a boy. And I would correct people, and I would see him just like put his head down, and he would just look so sad and withdrawn and so upset. And then it came time to do haircuts, and I cut our middle child, his hair, and I cut it short, and then like a nice little buzz cut for summer. And the next morning, our youngest climbed into bed with me and was laying next to me and was trying to convince me and negotiate their way for me to cut their hair short, saying, oh, if you just cut my hair like Sam's, then you don't have to fix it anymore, and it'll save you time. And this poor little kid was wanting just a haircut, and so I said, fine, I'll do a really short bob haircut on you, but then I get to pierce your ears. And so he was only 5 or 4. He was 4 at the time. And I pierced his ear. And just as things went on, I saw how miserable he was in preschool. I found a different preschool where he went with 4 boys and then him. And even though his preschool teacher was extremely conservative Mormon, she's just like, oh, you just have a tomboy on your hands. So I'm just like, fine, I have a tomboy on my hands.
Went along with it and kind of helped him, and he did so much better.
Yeah, he was so much happier. And then my best friend from high school was hanging out with us, and he would always tell me, oh, you just have a butch lesbian on your hands. You just have a butch lesbian, just deal with it now, come to terms with it. And I was just like, fine, I have a butch lesbian. I can handle that. Like that's fine.
We can figure out how to deal with that as Mormons.
We can navigate that one. But then I just saw how upset our child would become, and I finally realized how much it was hurting them. We were in Sam's Club shopping one day, And I had these older kids, they were probably like 10, 12, just pointing at my kid and laughing and saying, "Is that a boy or a girl?" And I lost it. I actually I turned to these kids who were standing next to their parent, their mom there at the store, and I flipped them off and I said, "Fuck you." And I left the store, and my child was just sitting in the cart with their head down crying. I'm pushing this cart out. I get out to the car, I sit in the car, I just cry, and I call Brandon at work and I said, "Get us out of this state. We can't raise our child here. I can't do this."
Good evening. LGBT individuals, or those who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender, often experience health disparities, or they experience worse health outcomes, both mental and physical, than their majority counterparts. But importantly, these disparities are not attributable to something inherently bad within this population, but rather attributable most often to minority stress. And so minority stress is really a combination of experience that I'll talk about in just 1 minute. But LGBT individuals experience an increase in exposure to this stress, specifically focused on their minority identity. And these can include minority stressors at a structural level or interpersonal level, so negative attitudes held by the public, being treated unfairly, or even policies such as the one that brings us here today, the bathroom bill. But minority stress can also be experienced on a more personal or internal level. So even if sexual or gender minorities never experience discrimination firsthand, they can experience the anticipation of it, that it's out there in the world and it could happen at any time. And so they might be really vigilant all the time, and they might be constantly monitoring the environment for whether it's safe to come out or be oneself, and this may also lead to concealment of identity in many settings. To illustrate the relationship between minority stress and health, I want to tell you about a study that was done in 2014. Hatzenbuehler examined mortality risk, and he found that in places across the United States that were generally more prejudiced, that lesbian, gay, and bisexual individuals died on average 12 years earlier. 12 years. So with mortality being the ultimate health outcome, I would say this is really big evidence for the importance of minority stress to individuals in this room. In 2011, the Institute of Medicine released a report about these disparities and what researchers can do in particular to study these issues and try to eliminate them. And as you can imagine, the healthcare encounter becomes of paramount importance when it comes to reducing disparities. But unfortunately, some research indicates that this context is also fraught with minority stress at various levels. So I'm going to end my part today with showing you a couple of excerpts taken directly from a qualitative study I did in Northeast Tennessee in response to a question asked about healthcare experience. Women reported, such as the first one, crappy experience, essentially being physician forcing condoms on her. Another forced a pregnancy test, And the last quote is from a trans woman who was told that there were no services equipped for her, and so she had to go elsewhere for health care.
So we know that there are barriers for LGBT individuals when they're seeking health care, and today I'd like to talk about a few simple ways that you can make your practice more welcoming and inviting for your LGBT patients. What I can tell you is that we will often scan your environment to know whether or not you are LGBT friendly. And we're looking for, is there any indication out there? So posting a safe zone sign in your office or even a small rainbow sticker at your front desk will give us that sign that we're looking for. The reason this is so important is because when LGBT individuals know that they're in a safe place and an affirming environment, they're much more likely to disclose the personal information that you need to provide them with the best health care. So when you post your non-discrimination statements, just be sure that you're including sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. Just a small effort on your part will go a long way toward making your LGBT patients feel more at ease. So here we are again with the bathroom issue. A universal gender-inclusive restroom is highly recommended in your offices. We know that many transgender and gender non-conforming individuals have been harassed for using the wrong bathroom. And so having at least one that is not labeled men and women is essential. Having some reading materials in the waiting room that is specific to LGBT individuals, like national magazines that are for and about this population. And find some and display some brochures that are about LGBT health concerns. Look for some that might have images that represent the LGBT community, like these you see here. Be willing, of course, to ask the necessary questions, but avoid unrelated probing. Sometimes just explaining why you need information can help avoid the perception of intrusion. For example, saying something like, in order to determine your health risk, can you tell me about any history you've had with hormone use? So this next information comes to us from the Fenway Institute in Boston. They are the leading center that offers guidelines in LGBT health. And they've provided us with the exact and appropriate language for collecting sexual orientation and gender identity data in electronic health records. This way of asking about gender eliminates the single male-female checkbox, and you can see here that we're asking both the current gender and the sex assigned at birth. And this is important because it gives you a more clinically relevant representation of your patient, and it also includes the options for individuals who have a non-binary gender. So asking a person's name and pronoun is also essential. What we know is that oftentimes someone who is maybe in transition hasn't changed their name legally, so on their health insurance it may read one way, but they go by another name. It's important that you train your front desk staff to get that name correct and use it every time, as well as with the proper pronouns. So this is the appropriate way to capture sexual identity information. It's important to be sure to use gender-neutral language, such as partner or significant other, until the patient identifies with a specific term. For instance, if a woman refers to her significant other as wife, then you use the term wife too. Don't change that to partner or worse yet, friend. So in closing, I would like to encourage you to go to the Fenway Institute website. They have wonderful information out there, including webinars that will help you as you're looking forward to providing information for your staff to prepare them to treat these patients that you're looking to treat. Thank you.
In their presentation, they mentioned the minority stress model. And I know that models can sometimes be academic concepts and not well applied. And I was just wondering if we could talk a little bit about how you see that practically speaking, or in applied ways.
I can speak a little bit to that. Can you hear my voice? No.
Everyone's paranoid now.
How about now? Oh, there we go. Okay. So I think that's a great question. Models can certainly be really theoretical. I think minority stress in particular is really important to consider in a clinic setting, whether a mental health clinic specifically or a physician office, or whatever combination that might be, a collaborative care sense. In that any health problem or behavior that might be presenting that is linked somehow to the experience of minority stress would be important to know, right? And to really be aware that minority stress is in that individual's life and possibly contributing to that behavior.
We're seeing it. Mm-hmm.
I would add that some of the minority stress that LGBT folks feel that occurs in healthcare context sometimes occurs as the result of inadvertent microaggressions. And when we healthcare providers become aware of these microaggressions, either because the patient has said something to us or a staff member has said something to raise awareness, that we not just sweep that microaggression under the rug, but that we deal with it head on and work to rebuild trust and to repair ruptures to therapeutic alliances, and deal with it very straightforwardly.
You mean microaggressions in the patient-provider relationship?
I do. Even healthcare providers that are very well intended can microaggress and create some of the minority stress in the context of the healthcare environment. And given that the healing relationship is one of the most pivotal aspects of what we provide, dealing with alliance ruptures head on is really important.
Can any of you give examples of things like that would be helpful?
Yeah, I was gonna, no, my mic's not working. Sorry.
There you go.
Let's see. There we go. Thank you. So, everybody's awake now, right? Everybody's awake?
Clearly mine is working.
Everybody's awake? So what I was going to say is that actually in our clinic, one of the ways that we've dealt with this is sort of acknowledging that it does exist. And sort of as we alluded to earlier, is one of the speakers actually was stating that to not allow it to be silenced. So rather than sort of ignoring it and pretending like it doesn't exist, we sort of bring it to the forefront. And we've created, we actually have a walk-in clinic for people who identify as trans or gender nonconforming twice a month, in which we have a multidisciplinary model available where there's behavioral health consultant, providers, insurance navigators, pharmacy, and the patients can truly just come to that space in a safe space for that moment in time. We can ensure that they'll be respected and that some of these experiences that they have out in the world, they can share that and create that camaraderie with peer networks, which has been very successful for us. So.
That's great. I know that when we think about minority groups, and certainly this applies to all minorities, there's this idea that stress creates health concerns, but is there a flip side to minority status and minority stress for the LGBT population? Can any of you talk about resilience?
Sure. I'm sorry, I've spoke a lot, but I do think that that's one of the things that I'm incredibly just always blown away with, how much resilience patients bring to the table. And often in my patient visits, people aren't even aware that they possess this incredible attribute, and just pointing it out to them that, you know, look at what you've done, look at how amazing it was you got here today. You came from neighborhoods that don't embrace you maybe, and crossed lines that maybe weren't necessarily safe. And sort of pointing out that's what resilience is and that's what it means. I think it can be incredibly empowering.
to hear that message, especially when people perceive us as whether it's right or wrong, as a person of power. And so, you know, having that sort of somebody that they trust tell them that, it carries a lot of weight, I think, in their lives.
Just to add to that, I think it's really interesting that the very minority stress that people experience can actually be a catalyst for resilience and what some people call positive marginality. So, you know, those living at the margins and really sort of taking that identity on and seeing something positive in that.
You know, I'll add to that, Stacey. Can you hear me? When I hear you say that, I think about the importance of coming together in groups and not just being out there on the fringe all alone. Like, for instance, at ETSU last semester, I, along with another colleague, started a transgender support group. And from just the semester that those students met together, I can see the progress and the change as they bond together as a group. Before that, they didn't even know each other really existed. And so I think sometimes when we help bring people together and they can like really rally around each other, I think that's where some of that resilience can really come in.
Other comments? I actually think that's a really nice note to have you talk a little bit, Steve, if you would, about your personal story.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Migalski. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and a psychology professor at Adler University. I run a private practice serving the LGBT community in Chicago. I'm the grandson of European immigrants, and I grew up in a working class, multi-generational home where Polish and Italian were spoken as first languages. I'm the son of a grocer and a homemaker, and sadly recently lost both of my parents to illness, heart disease and cancer, respectively. I am a devoted husband. I'm a brother, an uncle, and a nephew. I'm also a gay man. I came out 27 years ago, unabashedly proud to be out of the closet for more than half my life. I came of age in an insular community on the outskirts of Chicago at a time when we gay people were cloistered only in small pockets of urban centers. It was a time when transgender people were even more sequestered. Growing up a stone's throw from the Chicago suburbs, I felt fairly invisible as a gay kid. The thing about this kind of invisibility, folks, and I just lost my cue. The thing about this kind of invisibility is that it's pernicious. It's painful. It results in our feeling lost, like we don't have reflections of ourself, and don't see reflections of ourself in films and in television shows. And when we do, or when we did back in the 80s, it was typically as a tertiary character presented in the context of something violent or something unlawful, where words like sissy and fag were often used. When I was coming of age on the northwest side of the city, I dealt with a great deal of bullying, particularly in the context of my experience in an all-boys Catholic school. This happened, and frankly, sometimes teachers were complicit in the context of those bullying scenarios. I told myself that it would be very different when I attended university, where I went, and I did at Loyola University in Chicago. And when I was a student there, I did meet other gay people, but it was still the mid-'80s, and everything about sexuality then was still very much on the hush. These years were really a time only of flirting with self-acceptance, and I had not yet publicly acknowledged my being gay. It was really a time of loneliness and squelching of personal intimacy needs and sublimating all of my hopes and dreams into primarily academic pursuits. I was going to become a psychologist and study how children become depressed and what supported their healthy development, and I was really very curious about how gender and sexuality were implicated in the development of depression. But as a closeted undergraduate at the time, I really dared not tell a soul. I felt very frightened to do so. I did eventually enroll at Auburn University's doctoral program, several hundred miles south of Chicago, just far enough to give me the comfort to come out delicately. In retrospect, moving to the deep south to come out was not a great idea. I became almost immediately embroiled in gay politics at a time when it was actually unlawful for LGBT groups to even congregate on the campuses of state universities. We feared reprisal, and reprisal is exactly what we experienced. At Auburn, the bullying was far more insidious than anything I had experienced back in the suburban area of Chicago where I went to high school. It was a time at Auburn of consistent public ridicule, physical violence, and even, if you can imagine, a campus shooting incident. It didn't leave anybody injured, at least not physically so. And actually standing here before you today, it's actually very painful just to think about that shooting incident. I mean, can you imagine being shot at for posting flyers to announce the meetings of an LGBT student group? It's actually unthinkable. These experiences directly affected my health, physically and emotionally, as onerous stress often does. The shooting was covered by CNN, and as president of the LGBT student organization, I was interviewed, ignoring the fact that I hadn't yet come out to my family back home in Chicago. And my family saw the CNN story. My secret was out, and I was petrified. And in a moment, I was unsure of what the future held. I may very well be the only person to have ever come out to his family via CNN. Luckily, my family was very loving and supportive. But later, almost unbelievably, an Auburn advisor of mine dared ask me if I was sure if child psychology should be the focus of my doctorate. It seemed to come out of nowhere. Perhaps adults should be the focus, Steve, of your doctorate. You know, learn to work with people like yourself, he said. I immediately understood what he was saying. And I responded that I was really quite sure about my original intent to study children and child development and become a child clinical psychologist. He then said, look, as a gay man, it's going to be very hard for you to see children in clinical practice. People are just not going to take their children to see an openly gay psychologist. I was really fairly crestfallen. And I wondered if my identity as a gay man would keep me from my aspirations. No way. I redoubled my efforts. The rest of my time at Auburn was fairly emotionally raw, but it was growth enhancing. I started to date, and I was living more fully than ever before, openly and unapologetically. I developed friendships with other gay people. Some of those friendships have become lifelong. I also developed close attachments with transgender people for the first time in my life. My relationship with my trans friends was a gift. They modeled for me an authenticity I had not yet known, a genuineness of spirit and of presence that I just found really alluring. They taught me to question the uniformity of the LGBT community, which really caused me to open my heart and my mind to the many voices and unique narratives that actually comprise our community. Finally, I'd like to say that my trans brothers and sisters taught me the value of living fully in every moment. They taught me to own my trauma history, to own it, and to use it to create a deep empathy for the people with whom I would work. That is a lesson that I carry with me today in my clinical practice and in the training of my graduate students. Ultimately, I did become a child psychologist. Today, I look back with very few regrets. I'm privileged to work with children and their families, to serve the LGBT community, and to teach the next generation of clinical psychologists at Adler in Chicago. I've been doing that these last 12 years. I'm grateful that the advisors who were uncomfortable then with the idea that an openly gay man could be a child psychologist did not dissuade me. I didn't give up hope. I believed that the world could actually change, and it has, especially since marriage equality has become the law of the land. Things are not as positive, however, for our trans brothers and sisters, who really need our commitment, our respect, and our advocacy if we're to establish an equitable culture that facilitates their well-being. We do have a long way to go to achieve equity for, and fairness, really, for trans people, and actually to more fully establish the strides made by us gay, lesbian, and bisexual people. We, though, have come a long way since I began my studies at Auburn University more than 25 years ago. My ability to speak to you this openly and this honestly today, and this conference itself, is evidence of that fact. Please, I implore you, let's work to keep moving forward.
And I thought that I had to when I was younger, but I lost you when I lost you. I say I think I know what love is now. I think I got it figured out. But then the second that I open my mouth, I'm gonna change my heart again. I say I think I know what love is now. I think I kinda figured it out. But then the second that I open my mouth, I'm gonna change my heart again. Change my heart again.
O sistema de saúde público no Brasil ainda é muito deficiente para absorver, para atender as pessoas transgêneras, né? Então, eu, graças a Deus, sempre utilizei o sistema privativo de saúde, o qual me possibilitou ter acompanhamento de multiprofissionais, do qual eu precisava. Até porque a lei exige no Brasil que você tenha esse acompanhamento psicológico, psiquiátrico, endocrinológico. E, infelizmente, tem amigas que precisaram do sistema público de saúde e não conseguiram ou não foram aceitas, devido ao próprio sistema não estar adequado, não está totalmente com os profissionais necessários para atendê-las. E muitas vezes, muitas foram negadas atendimento.
I actually love my current doctor. She's really nice and amazing and educated on trans healthcare. But she has to be the 5th or 6th doctor I've tried. Most doctors that I've been with don't really understand trans issues and know the answer to my questions about my healthcare. Another thing I've really struggled with is finding a health insurance provider who sees trans issues and procedures as valid. A lot of the time they're seen as inessential and cosmetic, when to us they're really more life or death. Self-esteem for trans people is really hard, and making your body fit who you are is vital to our well-being.
What I would tell healthcare providers and people is to use the preferred pronoun and the preferred name that the person wants to be called by. And if you don't know, if you're unsure, then just ask, what is your preferred pronoun? What is the name you prefer to be called? So that people feel comfortable and feel welcome, because they're not going to feel welcome or comfortable, and they might even feel like turned off and leave and go somewhere else. Or even just suffer and not get treatment for the things that they're suffering with because of the misgendering. It's very upsetting.
So as you can see from the title page of my brief talk, I'm going to focus on compassionate care for patients beyond the binary. I'm going to lay a foundation today for this compassionate care, And I want to emphasize just how critical it is that all healthcare services be provided in the context of a healing relationship between provider and patient. And sort of ask you to redouble your efforts in understanding that we have to strive for accuracy in our terminology and in sensitivity of our manner. Empathy, warmth, and genuineness are vital. We've known for more than 30 years. These are core ingredients, and they are especially significant for patients who will be skeptical of our intentions and dubious about our skills to serve them well. I'm going to offer to you 10 essential points, and then I'm going to provide actual patient narratives from a recent study of 45 transgender patients who identified common mistakes that we clinicians make when we provide service to them. First, although often used interchangeably, sex is biological, and it refers to physiological, chromosomal, and anatomical characteristics. Please remember that conversely, gender is social and refers to the broad range of masculinity and femininity embedded in time, in place, and in culture. In reality, humans just don't fit neatly into two categories of either sex or gender. Intersex people challenge us beyond this binary with their distinctive biologies, and trans people push us outside the binary too, with their remarkable identities. Gender identity refers to one's personal experiences of gender and may or may not be congruent with one's assigned biological sex. Gender expression is how a person presents outwardly through dress, through speech and behavior. Meanwhile, gender role is really become a passé term, implying a predetermined script that's assigned at birth. Therefore, I really dissuade you from using the phrase gender role. Gender queer and gender fluid people are those who just don't identify with a prototypical masculine or feminine identity, and they fairly rejecting of conventional gender distinctions. Moreover, cisgender as a term refers to anyone whose gender identity is actually congruent with their biological sex, while transgender refers to those whose gender identity is incongruent with their sex. Thus, a trans man is a male deemed a female at birth, while a trans woman is a female deemed a male at birth. Broadly speaking, transitioning is the process of syncing one's gender identity with indicators that are social, emotional, and medical. Social transitioning might involve altering one's clothing or name or one's pronouns. Emotional transitioning is the process of emotional self-acceptance, and if pursued, medical transitioning may include hormone treatments and or surgeries. I say if pursued because not all trans people do decide to pursue medical transitioning. It's key to remember that not all trans people transition in entirely the same way, as there are many unique paths. In the midst of social transition, it's also quite necessary to invite dialogue about pronoun usage. So I encourage all of you providers, when you're in doubt about pronouns, simply ask individuals about what pronouns they use. Also note that sexual orientation and gender identity are related, but they are not the same thing. They intersect to create complex social identities of difference, each of which may prove to be a route of oppression or discrimination. Consider, if you will, to exemplify this notion of intersectionality, a patient who is a gay, Latina, Jewish, transgender woman. There's a lot of intersectionality there, isn't there? Thus, we must not assume uniformity of experience for our patients. In fact, hard and fast rules of thumb do them no good. Finally, I'll share the testimonies of trans patients to exemplify what 8 of our most common professional blunders feel like for them. Here are the definitions. I'm going to offer you some narratives, and the patient narratives that you'll hear coincide with the clinician missteps defined here on this slide, and will be presented in the corresponding order. So to exemplify education burdening, Maria said, "I think that trying to find a competent and friendly provider is just really a struggle, and a lot of trans people don't have one that is completely aware and comfortable with the situation." As an example of gender inflation, Jose reported, "If I'm going to see somebody for my anxiety, for my nervousness, my tension, and all they have to say is that those things must be the result of the fact that I'm trans, how can I possibly trust that person? It's very frustrating." To demonstrate gender narrowing, Sam shared, "My doctor had a very narrow view of gender and wanted only to talk about gender in her way and completely ignored my understanding of what gender is." Rebecca, to indicate gender avoidance, said, "The therapist was so confident that there was no real reason for us to explore my trans identity that it really colored the entire course of mental health treatment that was so necessary." Millie, in exemplifying gender generalization, stated, "You know, each of us is really unique, and there is no one-size-fits-all. I didn't listen to my doctor because I actually knew he was saying something that just did not fit for me." Gender repairing is exemplified in Frederick's statement. "I'd gone to a therapist with my wife early on. She was making comments like, 'I know this hypnotherapist. Maybe we can get him to help you overcome this.'" Gender pathologizing is demonstrated in Cassandra's narrative. "A lot of psychiatrists seem to think that my being transgender is an illness, and that doesn't feel good. They also think that's why I have all these problems, because of my illness." And finally, to exemplify rigid gatekeeping, Eugene said, "I was reluctant to give her my true feelings about what being trans feels like because all of the gatekeeping that goes on. It goes on in a rampant way in the medical community. So I told her what she wanted to hear, so I'd get my letter of approval. Yet, weeks before, another doctor said, 'Just play along, and I'll give you your paperwork.'" I must reiterate to you folks that to truly serve our trans and non-binary patients requires a very strong commitment to listen to them, to listen to their narratives and their unique stories, to work to be precise and sensitive in how we speak and in our manner of relating, and most of all, to educate ourselves first.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm wondering about gender avoidance versus gender inflation, sort of a new patient coming in to see us in the office and on the one hand not wanting to avoid the topic or overlook something very important, but at the same time a fear that we're going to seem as though we're overanalyzing it or making a bigger case than we should. Do you all have language that you could share that you maybe use with new patients to open the door and bring this topic up in a way that's balanced?
Yes. I think on our intake paperwork we ask very specific questions, and then when we actually meet directly with the client, there are ways that we just kind of like open the conversation in a very natural way. And if I see that someone has marked, gender nonconforming or trans on their intake paperwork, I'll just simply say, "I noticed that you marked that. Is there anything about that you want me to know as it's going to relate to your care?" And just let them go. Because I've had clients say, "That doesn't have anything to do with why I'm here. I really want to talk about these other issues." And so I let the client take the lead on which way we go, knowing that it may come up in, the end as well, just staying flexible with it.
I think that's great. I think from a medical standpoint, I've heard both extremes. So like, for example, I had a trans man who was in the ER for an asthma exacerbation, and he was stating that much of the conversation that many of the residents asked were pertaining to his testosterone dose and how much tea he was on. What does that, what does that do to your body? And he literally was like, so about my difficulty breathing, like, can we focus? Mm-hmm. So I think we can become, I think what you said is so important, mm-hmm. because we can become so infatuated with the fact that we have maybe somebody who is gender variant or trans, and we want to know more about it just because we want to be better clinicians, and we're like, hey, this is an opportunity. But that's not really the place to learn. So I think it's really important to like you said, sort of let the patient guide where they want to go in that visit, mm-hmm. and to not sort of make them be a spectacle or something, subhuman. So.
Yeah.
I'd like to sort of approach it from just a slightly different perspective, from the perspective of supervision and consultation. I'm a psychodynamically oriented psychologist, and I am actively involved in a monthly supervision and consultation group, regardless of the fact that I've been licensed for 16 years. And sometimes when we've been doing this work for a while, we convince ourselves that our own emotional reactions to the work that we do is irrelevant, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm not suggesting you all need to become psychodynamically oriented, but I am suggesting that you need your own professional safe space to talk with colleagues, even if it's a group of 3 or 4 people. Meet monthly, talk about your reactions emotionally, talk about your own histories and your biases and stereotypes around gender. Confronting those issues head on will help you to avoid gender avoidance, mm-hmm. and all of its permutations.
Sure. And what about missteps? So surely some of us might feel like we're trying to follow along and kind of get everything right, and we've been talking about it with colleagues, we've been thinking through and using the Fenway forms, and but we still might not quite get it right sometimes. So how do you all recommend sort of problem solving and responding when we don't get it right?
So do you mind if I just, since I've been speaking about it, in my presentation I talked about, I inferred Patterson's famous paper from the 80s on empathy, warmth, and genuineness, and how the attachment between clinician and patient is pivotal, not just for trans patients, but for all patients. Anytime we become aware that there has been even a mini rupture to the therapeutic process or to any healthcare related service, it's important, I think, to deal with that sensitively and head on, and not pretend that it didn't happen. One of the most predictive outcomes of, at least in my field, psychotherapeutic process, is in dealing with therapeutic ruptures head on. So I would suggest that whether we're primary care physicians or psychotherapists or social workers or psychologists or nurses, given that each of us is prone to therapeutic rupture, that we accept that fact and we deal with it.
I also wanted to add that you mentioned, I think earlier you mentioned that the asking of pronouns is appropriate, and sort of the phrase that we sometimes hear is preferred pronoun, and I just wanted to put this out there that it's really not a preference, and so I liked that you're asking, what is your pronoun? Preference harkens back to sexual preference, which is also pretty obnoxious. So I would say keeping it, what are your pronouns actually gets at it. I don't know if any of you have experience in talking with people directly.
Yeah, the one thing I would like to add is that we know that there are going to be missteps. There are going to be times that we misgender someone, and I think we just have to make that apology, be very sincere, make the repair, and move forward. Don't over-exaggerate. Oh, I'm so sorry, I messed that up, I got that wrong. Like, don't do that. That is so upsetting to trans individuals. Just a simple, I'm sorry, I'll try harder. You know, I think it's that simple. Know that they're going to happen and deal with it when it does.
You know, Harry Stack Sullivan's famous quotation, "We are all more simply human than otherwise," applies here.
Yes.
If we exemplify our humanity in an appropriate way, it makes the patient feel like he or she can also be straightforwardly human with us.
Michelle, you've had so many amazing experiences working with the trans population. I'd love for you to get up and tell your story and tell us about their stories as well.
Good evening. Thank you for staying. I know it's been a long day, so I appreciate everybody's attention and staying for this amazing event. So my name is Michelle Evers. I prefer the pronouns she and her. I was born in a small town in Ohio, and I had the picturesque upbringing of two loving parents. They were married and were committed to bringing up a child together. I often look back at the pictures and think, did my dad dream about walking me down the aisle in our local Catholic church with his little Prince Charming? Did my mother dream about dressing me up for all the special occasions? Parents have preconceived ideas about what their children will become, dreams about their future. Looking back, I wonder how they would have reacted had they known I was gay. My childhood was fantastic. My parents were blue-collar, hardworking people, full of great work ethics and determination. They instilled in me the drive that I still possess today. They taught me about the importance of education, my dad working in the farm and also in a factory full-time, and my mother working in a school cafeteria. One of the best aspects of my childhood is that both of my parents dispelled the traditional gender roles that girls have to fulfill. This meant that hunting, fishing, and playing sports were a routine part of my life. When reviewing pictures for this presentation, I did have a laugh over the fact that I frequently dressed up as Wonder Woman. So I thought that would include this in this talk. My particular favorite is the one where I'm trying to rock the mullet there. So there's that. Dating was strict and could not happen until age 18. And throughout high school, I had the traditional 2 relationships. I had a relationship with a partner named Doug, who was on the football team. We related about sports, hard work, and all of that. The second relationship was a guy from the church. Upon my reflection of my relationship with him, I would be remiss not to include my relationship with his sister. Her and I would spend time together when I went over to visit her brother. We shared our struggles with not fitting in with the traditional groups in our high school. We both loved sports. Volleyball and softball were a large part of our lives. Her mother hated our relationship. She came out to me at age 19. Living in the dorms, striking out on my own, was the independence that I yearned for. My life was busy pursuing a nursing degree, working full-time, and going clubbing with friends. Sure, I kissed some girls along the way, but isn't that what college is about? When I least expected, I met another guy. We spent time going to museums, enjoying photography, and traveling. He introduced me to new music, some of which are still my favorite bands today. While living in Zambia, I played on an expat volleyball team. It was during this time, hanging out with a guy in a particular intimate moment, when he said, "If you could fulfill any fantasy, what would it be?" And my response without thinking was, to be with a woman. My boyfriend met me in South Africa, and this is where I told him I couldn't do it any longer. We still managed to travel and maintain our rustic adventure together. I commend him for that. Underneath it all, I could feel this growing sense of uneasiness, feeling like something was unsettled. It felt strong, and I had a growing sensation of the awareness that I was different, that I did not fit into the normative. I was scared and I didn't really know how to act on it. I didn't know what to do. They didn't teach sexual education in my hometown, let alone same-sex love education. If I'm with a woman, would I know what to do? Would she know more than me? Moving back to Chicago, I was thrown into a graduate nursing program and working full-time on the floor as a nurse. Shortly after graduating, I met my first girlfriend. She approached me, she wrote me provocative letters, and she intrigued me. This promised to be the thing that I was looking for. Sparing you the details, it truly was. The light bulb went off. Looking back, I remember how perfectly natural everything was. Our relationship was intense, tumultuous, intimate at a level that I'd not previously experienced. Reflections about my sexuality were part of my daily thought process. For all intentions and purposes, I view myself more on the continuum rather than a concrete description. The sexual identity diagram summed it up poetically. Do I prefer the company of women? Well, yes. Do men repulse me? No. This relationship was too tumultuous to be sustainable and dissipated. On November 16th, 2011, I met my wife. We have been inseparable since this time. Our marriage is the foundation that allows me to succeed in all aspects of my life. She is the glue that truly holds me together. Working with the transgender, gender nonconforming population has allowed me to take my experiences of my nonconformity and relate them to my patients' lives. Each of my patients' lives are unique, and their experiences and their voices deserve to be heard. Often I am aware of just how important giving a voice to our patients are. Allowing them to express themselves is the single most important aspect of their healthcare experience. Often I am impacted by a patient's story of life, and I wanted to share just a few with you. I had a 65-year-old patient, a transgender woman from a small town in Wisconsin. During our visit, I was reviewing some of the risks of continuing her on hormone feminizing therapy, given she had developed a DVT. Finally, she stated, "Listen, I know you're nervous, but understand if I keel over and die in this exam room, remember that you made me a happy woman." It's very persuasive. I had another 28-year-old Hispanic Latina patient who told me as an adolescent her family had tried to do 2 separate exorcisms and took her to multiple psychiatrists and psychologists to determine, quote, what was wrong with her. Her family was convinced that she was amidst some sort of temporary identity crisis. Only after striking out on her own, I witnessed her transformation. On a Friday night, she came into our clinic. She came in shy and unsure. She is now living as a vibrant woman, and at her last visit, she stated, "My coworker asked me if I get a lot of cramping with my period. I said no, and she said, 'You are so lucky.' If only she knew." I had another patient, just to sort of exemplify the tenacity of my patients. I had a 33-year-old trans male of color who was desperate to get top surgery and found a surgeon in Warsaw, Poland that he could afford. So both him and his wife went to go get the surgery, and on the day of the surgery, he asked the surgeon, "How many people of color have come here for top surgery?" And he said, "Well, including you, 1. Another patient said, "People thought I was a lesbian. I always knew I was more than that. My mom told me one day, 'I think you are just one of those butch lesbians I read about.' But I knew that wasn't it either. I need your help. I hate that I have boobs. Really, they just do not belong on my body. I do not care about body hair, my voice changing like the other trans guys want. I just want my boobs gone and maybe just to be a little more masculine. Please call me they or them. I really don't want to feel polarized." When I consider my career today and reflect on all these stories, I cannot help but think, yes, I have found a place where I belong. For the gender nonconforming community that I see, I am constantly amazed at their tenacity, resilience, and ability to advocate for their health care. Many of my patients allow me into the most vulnerable aspects of their lives, and for that, I am honored to be their healthcare provider. Thank you.
So do it today, yeah. 'Cause I can see you there horizon. What have you done today to make you feel right, yeah. Let me hear you, let me hear you, let me hear you. So what have you done today to make you feel proud? Yeah, yeah, yeah. 'Cause you could be so many people if you make that breath for freedom. So what have you done today to make you feel proud? What have you done today? Yeah, let me hear you.
To families, I would like to say, don't ever be dismissive of them. Even if you don't understand them or who they are or their identities, still approach them with love and tell them that they are valid and loved in spite of who they are, because the world is often telling us that we aren't loved and we're worthless, and that causes a lot of pain and suffering that doesn't need to be there.
E quanto à família? Sempre para a família é mais difícil você falar qualquer coisa que vá de encontro ao que a família pensava anteriormente para você, né? Como dizer que os sonhos que ela pensou, que ela formulou para você, são diferentes para você. E eu só digo o seguinte: busquem informação. Não esqueçam que ninguém escolhe o caminho mais difícil. As pessoas escolhem o caminho que elas acreditam que elas vão ser felizes. Então tente compreender seus filhos, tente perceber quais são as suas dificuldades e tente abraçá-lo. Tente junto com ele buscar aquele caminho mais seguro, aquele caminho que realmente vai trazer uma felicidade plena para a pessoa. O importante, eu acredito que é essa, todo mundo tentar buscar a felicidade, seja ela até diferente, muito diferente daquilo que você pretendia para aquela pessoa.
Yeah, it's up to us as cisgender people to stand shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm with the transgender community and fight with them for their rights.
Yeah.
You're patient with yourself, that you're going to make mistakes, you're going to maybe do the wrong thing, and you're going to be worried you're doing the wrong thing all the time, but just to just put it in perspective that you're trying to do the best thing you can.
I understand that you grieve the loss of that person in your family. I grieve the loss of my little girl every so often. I just sit down and I just cry, and I feel like I lost that child. I don't have that little girl that I had all these hopes and dreams and these plans in my mind for. Those are gone. And I have this other beautiful person in front of me who I have new hopes and dreams for.
All right, now that we're feeling invigorated, I'm going to talk about the topic of advocacy, which is so important. So what does advocacy look like? I thought in order to understand this, we needed to take a look back. One of the first things that came to mind when preparing for this presentation were the Stonewall riots. This was the first time in American history that a group united to oppose gay violence in law. This movement changed the trajectory of gay rights, and it gave national attention to a topic that had not been previously discussed. The next topic is the actions of ACT UP Committee, which definitely still affect me today. The desperation that this community felt can be palpated in the pictures that are represented. This organization united a community who were tired of being ignored and abandoned. Their work has paved the way to HIV/AIDS treatment and care still today. So these are a thing of the past. But if we look now, we can look at the advancements that we've made. Stars that have come out as advocates of the LGBT community of different laws and legislation, such as the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repealing, and the Matthew Shepard hate crime law. So we can look at advocates in our community. We can look back at Ellen. We can look back at Laverne Cox, who appeared on the cover of Time magazine, the first time a transgender woman had ever appeared on anything like this. There was another gentleman by the name of Adrian Darling, who was actually a part of the annual Ultimate Guy contest on the Men's Health magazine. This was the first trans men to ever appear on the cover. I'm honored to have two of my dearest friends, both Miles and Precious, who were able to meet with the President of the United States and discuss trans advocacy and rights. Precious wrote after this meeting, "What an honor it was for Miles and I this summer to have the opportunity to meet President Obama. The President thanked us for the work we do, encouraged us to continue to advocate for transgenders in our community, told us he loves us, and to check out #TransObamas," which is like a real thing. I don't know, I don't tweet, but I know it is. Another pivotal thing that occurred is the Trans Black History Month. It takes place in February, coinciding with Black History Month, which is a pivotal advocacy movement. It illustrates some of the drastic health disparities that exist within this community, as well as the violence that's disproportionately affected by people of color. So now that we have marriage equality, that we have stars that we can look to who are out about being gay, lesbian, transgender, now what do we do? Is there anything left? Can we just walk away? So I was looking at different organizations actually, and I was really impressed by this series called Boys Do Cry. And it's an organization, it actually is a documentary that shows the intersection issues of violence facing transgender men and other transmasculine people. It strives to elevate the voices of transmasculine survivors of violence. Just last month, we can look forward at the Windy City Times, which illustrated the violence that has existed within Chicago. I'm sure all of you are very well aware of the media coverage of the homicide rates in Chicago, but in fact, there's a disproportionate violence within the trans community. I did want to illustrate some of the things that are still going on with transgenders in the legislation against not using gender-neutral bathrooms. Trans and gender nonconforming people have the right not to feel pressured to conform to binary construct when doing something as simple and routine as using a public bathroom. Sorry, I had to put this in here. It was too good. I mean, you know. We have to find humor, right? This is actually an amazing organization. It's a group that actually has united, that really brings to the forefront this, not only trans violence, but actually the rate at which trans people are isolated with law enforcement and sort of targeted in the community. So when I looked at this, I was sort of like, well, that's a thing from like, you know, the 40s. Come on, we're over this, right? This sort of old idea, this rhetoric about the cure for homosexuality. And then I saw these signs, and I was like, where am I? So this is still something that exists today, that people truly feel that being gay is a choice. And we can't forget about Orlando. Orlando transformed our country. It rocked our core. Everyone in the community felt shaken. Omar Mateen, which was the 21-year-old security guard, killed 49 people and wounded 53 others in this terrorist/hate crime inside the Pulse a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. So what do we do when advocacy feels like this? I think this sign is really poetic because we need to pay attention to people within the ally community, people who maybe identify as straight, heterosexual, that are leading the campaigns for LGBT rights. Just saying. So I think it is important, and all of you, by sitting through this talk, believe that healthcare really should be for all. That, sitting in these trainings, learning more about how to be LGBT competent is an important part of how you can be a better provider and a better community member. Some things that I think you should sort of give yourself a pat on the back. I think a lot of this we're already doing, and we do in such a natural and sort of honest way. With our patients, we create a safe space, we restore hope, we're present, and we acknowledge the shortcomings in our system. The term ally can go a long way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. One quick question for the panel. Being an ally and doing things to advocate for the LGBT community is so important and feels so great when there are these kind of obvious opportunities, like being able to walk or being able to write a letter or being able to stand up in an organized situation. What else can we do? It always feels like there should be more. There could be more.
So I can speak to that briefly. So one of my hats at my university is to lead or co-lead our safe zone training for campus. And one of the things that we really emphasize is that there's this continuum of being an ally. And we often think about allies as maybe activists, so that extreme version and kind of what you're talking about. But it's a continuum, and so wherever you are along that, you can think of ways to be an ally for the community. And I would say a lot of that deals with just educating yourself and being open and aware.
What I hear a lot about safe space stickers is, oh, it's passé, it's very 90s. I disagree. The country is not a homogenous place, and in different communities, those safe space stickers are a message and a beacon of absolute safety. I would add that for anyone in the room who happens to also be LGBT identified, if and when you feel safe enough, it's important for there to be LGBT identified providers. Most of the phone calls that I get in my practice are of interested patients saying, do you have a gay psychologist on staff? Do you have someone who's trans-friendly? If you are in a position to be out as a healthcare provider, it's one of the most important advocacy things you can do.
Great. Stacey and Beth Evelyn, your story has a lot with advocacy in it, so I'd love it if you'd tell us.
So Beth Evelyn and I obtained our...
We might be too close. Go ahead.
Our marriage license the very day the Supreme Court made in favor of marriage equality. And just a few days afterward, we married in Tennessee on July 4th, 2015. And just a few days after that, we're debating marriage equality.
So Stacey and I first got together in the fall of 2009. Almost immediately, we were committed to one another, inseparable and deeply in love. On the following winter solstice, we created our own private ceremony just for the two of us and exchanged the rings that we designed for ourselves. We celebrate that date still as our anniversary. But I never really thought I would ever get married. I came of age in Tennessee at a time when lesbian relationships were not recognized or considered valid. And I just wasn't somebody that could see myself running off to another state and getting married where it was legal, only to return back to Tennessee where my marriage would be considered invalid.
And on the other hand, I was in a previous long-term heterosexual relationship, a marriage, never having to worry about my rights, marriage or otherwise. That is until I came to accept myself for who I was, and I divorced my husband and began living authentically as a lesbian woman. And it was at that point, even though I was the exact same person, that I lost the right to marry.
So fast forward to June 26, 2015. After 6 years together, we were able to demonstrate our commitment to one another by obtaining our marriage license and getting married. We did so in a ceremony. Sorry, I just saw that photo. Okay, we did so in a ceremony at our home in Johnson City, Tennessee, surrounded by 50 friends and family. We stated the vows that we had written for each other. It was a gloriously happy time for us both as a couple and as lesbian women who had been previously denied the right to marry.
But soon after began rumblings from people in Tennessee not in favor of marriage. In fact, across the state, there were resolutions being heard that were going against the Supreme Court decision and in favor of the original definition of marriage between one man and one woman. And when Beth, Evelyn, and I heard about this, we were overwhelmed with disappointment and worry. You know, we thought, could they take our rights away? Even though the Supreme Court had ruled, could these local governments still create problems for us? In Washington County, where we live, there was to be a hearing of a resolution. A county commission was going to decide whether or not to accept this resolution. And so we decided to rally people.
Yeah, and we did this not only for ourselves, but for the young gay kids in our area. We wanted to make sure that they saw that there were people fighting for their rights too. So we joined the ongoing efforts of the Tennessee Equality Project, an advocacy organization in our state, who were rallying people to attend courthouse meetings wearing red so that they would stand out and make an impact across the entire state. Almost overnight, together we organized hundreds of people on a private Facebook page to show up at the local courthouse, all wearing the color red, the night that the resolution against marriage equality was to be heard.
But we actually had no idea how many people would show up, and so when we got there, we were amazed to discover that we rallied so many people that we shut down the meeting. There were so many people we couldn't all fit in the courthouse, and anyone who shows up has the right to hear the proceedings, so they had to postpone. And so at this postponed meeting, we rallied even more people. Over 800 people showed up, many of whom were wearing red.
But a lot of people there were not wearing red. People who were against marriage equality, they had rallied too.
We sat in the courtroom for 8 hours, listening to 60 or more people each give a 3-minute speech about why or why not the commissioners should vote for this resolution. We heard impassioned speeches from both sides of the issue. We heard hateful speech. We actually experienced firsthand the minority stress of being denounced by ministers, by community members. On the other hand, we heard people speaking out against bigotry and hate. So really it was this odd combination, equal parts exhausting and stressful, and then oddly empowering.
There was also a lot of fear. Each person that spoke out had to verify that they lived in Washington County, so you'd get up to the podium and have to state your name and where you lived. What we noticed was on the other side, a woman not wearing red who looked very angry was writing down all of our names and our addresses. And we had no idea what would come of this. Like, would something bad happen? We didn't know.
And that fear of retribution that we had carried over into the next day. And after work, Beth, Evelyn, and I were so exhausted from the previous evening's activities. we were just ready for rest. But we hadn't been home more than 5 minutes and the doorbell rang, and the dogs started barking like mad, and we just sort of looked at each other, momentarily frozen. All of the previous evening's events just flooded back through us, and we thought about the hateful speech and the menacing looks, and then, of course, that woman who was writing down all of our addresses. So we wondered, could this be someone showing up to hurt us?
Right, so I grabbed my cell phone and, frightened and shaken, was going to the door, and I peered out the window, and I'm relieved to tell you that it was a flower delivery truck.
Yes, our friend John sent us flowers in support, in solidarity, and as soon as we saw those flowers, we immediately cried, for the kind gesture, of course, but also because of the recognition of our fear and that people in our community might want to hurt us. So I'm relieved to report that nothing bad actually came of that experience. What I can tell you is that having one's life politicized and one's relationship debated, it's just driven home for me the personal meaning of advocacy. It wasn't just gay people, our gay friends, showing up at the courthouse in support. It was gay and straight alike. It was ministers and doctors and lawyers and nurses and teachers and, the whole gamut. And that really made a big impact on us. So, by the way, the resolution did not pass. And we end our presentation today with a picture of a double rainbow. And this actually appeared in the sky of our town the day after the resolution was heard. And thank you. Marriage equality is still the law of the land, according to the Supreme Court and Washington County. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why you gotta be so rude? I'm gonna marry you anyway. Marry that girl. Marry you anyway. Marry that girl. No matter what you say, marry that.
And so we end tonight's opening plenary. Thank you for being here for it. And if all of you will join me, I'd really like to thank all of our panelists for bringing their expertise and, most importantly, their personal stories to the stage tonight. Thank you, guys. You guys stand up. And we also owe a huge thanks to the mastermind behind our program tonight, the great, creative, progressive, and loving force within CFHA that is Randall Reitz. Randall, can you cue the music? And come on out here.
When I was in the 3rd grade, I thought that I was gay, cause I could draw. My uncle was, and I kept my room straight. I told my mom, tears rushing down my face. She's like, Ben, you've loved girls since before pre-K. Trippin'. Yeah, I guess she had a point, didn't she? Bunch of stereotypes all in my head. I remember doing the math, like, yeah, I'm good at Little League. A preconceived idea of what it all meant. For those that like the same sex, have the characteristics. The right-wing conservatives think it's a decision. And you can be cured with some treatment in religion.